All right, episode 738 of Extreme Health Radio is brought to you by MitoLife's Dissolve-It-All Systemic Enzyme Formula, their Magnesium ATP product, and their vitamin E product called Poopa Protect. More on those later on in the episode. All right, welcome, my friends, to episode 738 of Extreme Health Radio. This is going to be an awesome, kind of crazy show. We're going to share the story of Trina Thornhill's daughter, Mackenzie, and her story that's just heartbreaking. But I originally heard of Trina through the Truth Warrior podcast, and she shared her story on there as well. And that's how I learned of her. And wow, I just had to have her on because I think it's a really important issue to talk about, and it's really important for parents to understand their rights and for parents to understand how the hospital system works, the medical system works. And there's I got this. Go playing again. So it's really important to understand how all this stuff works and stay out of the hospitals. Whatever you do, please do what you can to stay away from the hospitals. And if you guys have been following anything that's been going on with Big C, Little V in the last couple of years, you realize that most people that are dying as a result of going into the hospitals. So we're going to I'll introduce her in just a second. If you're new to the show, we broadcast every Friday morning and our new shows come out every Sunday. So if you subscribe to the show, you're subscribed on iTunes or Spotify, wherever you're listening, there's shows every single day, our best of episodes, 6 days a week. And then on Sunday is our brand new episodes. Today's episode is 738, so I'll put links to everything that we talk about, Trina's website, anything that we discuss. I'll do my best to take notes at extremehealthradio.com/738. And Trina Thornhill is a registered holistic nutritionist. She's a graduate of the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition, and she helps people around the world with their own health. And she's a creator and the owner of foodfueled.com. And Trina, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Justin, for having me. It's very nice to be here.
Yeah, and like I said, I heard about you, and I had to kind of put that out on Instagram and shared the episode you did with the Truth Warrior podcast. Was that the first show that you did about Mackenzies Story?
Yes, it was.
Oh, wow. I was literally walking my dog listening to that. And a couple times I almost cried. But it's a story. And like I mentioned, this is something that people need to know and how the hospital systems work, right?
Yeah. Every parent is one step away from making that decision and not even realizing that they're walking into something that's actually it could quite likely end the life of your child. And that's what happened to Mackenzie.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about, sharing her story, because you mentioned to me via email that it's really important for you to share her story, and I think so as well. So can you just get into a little bit of, starting us off on that journey with her?
For sure. So Mackenzie I woke up to medical issues with both my children when they were young. So I kind of walked into it with vaccine injury. That was one of the ways that I woke up, and I ended up getting into holistic nutrition. So I had both children outside of that system until what happened with Mackenzie. Mackenzie had a mast cell activation. So that means that she was more reactive to a whole bunch of different variables. So we'd had her stable for years. And we ended up going to a hospital here in Orangeville because things just weren't right with Mackenzie for a little while. And as a direct result, when we went to Orangeville, they ended up sending us into sick kids because they felt the sick kids would be better because it specializes in children. Sadly, calling the hospital sick kids is, it sets the stage for somewhere you wouldn't want to go. And I was aware of some of the stories within sick kids, and I was just hoping that wasn't ours. When we went in.
So really quickly, you said that things with Mackenzie weren't well. What was going on that you saw?
So she just became really weak and lethargic. There was a GI map that had been done previously. So she had overgrowth, intestinal overgrowth and those types of things. But there was also a lot of stress going on. Her father and I are divorced, and that stress was playing a major role. So she was having that was compounding a couple things. So she became dizzy and she wasn't feeling 100%. And it wasn't something that just getting her to my naturopath or anything would have been 100%. I would have still ended up being sent into a hospital to have her checked. Mm-hmm. And by the time that we had got in to have her looked at, they were concerned that the hospital, they didn't feel that the local hospital would have been suitable. So when they sent us in, her blood pressure had dropped and she was anemic. So all things that weren't evident on her skin, she didn't have any of the traditional markers for any of that. So that's the one reason that they sent us into sick kids.
And so really quickly going back, you said that both of your children were vaccinated. Do you think this started as a result of that?
Oh, 1,000%. Oh yeah.
And they went through all the shots or just some of them?
No. So I stopped, Mackenzies before her 4 and 6. And at that time when I was questioning anybody, and this is before I'd even gotten into her nutrition or holistic nutrition or anything, mm-hmm. I couldn't get any answers. And then it was just the one vaccine for my youngest, and Mackenzie's health was very different. She would stop breathing. There were a whole bunch of things. And I had gone to, by the time she was 7, I had used the whole system, meaning I had gone to gastroenterologist, I had utilized occupational therapist and dietitians, and we couldn't get any answers for her. So as a result of that, her intestinal tract was really, really sensitive. So once I made all the dietary changes, I noticed that everything seemed to right herself. Right. She became well.
Interesting.
Proper stool, being able to eat, gaining weight, and all those types of things. Up until that point in time, I was in and out of the system and they couldn't help me. So I knew I had to figure out another way. And what's really interesting is up here, naturopaths and that type of medicine at that time also wasn't really utilized a lot. And so it was a learning curve for me to figure that all out, and me going back to school helped with that. And then Ashlyn had one vaccine and she reacted to that as well. So I was really aware of how the system is broken, the system doesn't educate you, and that our children are at risk. So I had already been part of Vaccine Choice Canada, mm-hmm. also trying to educate as many people as possible, and then working to stabilize both kids and remove as much toxins as possible and get them in the best health as possible. Do I think that what happened with Mackenzie, that vaccines played a role? Yes. At the same time, I think they misdiagnosed her based on the information that I have to date, and that she was also used because she was biracial. And that opened up a whole different revenue stream for the hospital because at the time we were there last year, she was the only biracial child that was within their program.
So when you talk about revenue stream, what are you talking about specifically? It's interesting.
Well, we were both, but they asked me, well, first, how it operates here in Canada is there is mature minor doctrine. So that means that if the doctor perceives that child to be mature enough to manage their own healthcare, basically, then the parent isn't really consulted. So as soon as we ended up in Sick Kids, that's exactly what happened. I couldn't get access to her medical file without her signature and permission.
Really?
So how things unfolded within the hospital, when they first did the lumbar puncture and the spinal tap, because that's what they do, or the bone aspiration to get the sample, they said that it didn't show the results it didn't show conclusive results. I was really concerned. And at that time, I'd already reached out to people because I knew how Sick Kids worked. I knew that there was a really good chance because they had already assessed her also for her sexuality, which was very interesting. So within Canada, if a child identifies as anything other than what they are, and a parent does not respect that, CAS will step in automatically and take over healthcare for that child. So they had already done that investigation for Mackenzie as part of their process once you're on the inpatients component of Sick Kids. And Mackenzie
I think on the other show I listened to with you, they did that through paperwork, and then someone was there in the room asking Mackenzie questions, and you weren't even there, right?
No, I actually was sitting there because Mackenzie, the doctor said that she wanted me to leave. Mackenzie said, nope, I want you to stay. And Mackenzie and I were really close, and I'm close with my other daughter, Ashlyn, as well. So, and I had explained how the medical system works, that it's very important for a parent to be present. And of course, the doctors can ask any questions at all, and the parents are there to actually be a protective measure. Mm-hmm. So when we were sitting there, they just started asking, the doctor was like, so I just, just like to know what you identify as. And Mackenzie doesn't know what that even means, not because I've kept her away from everything. The school that she attended, the school that she attended, that wasn't used. Those words weren't used. 2, she's been homeschooled for the last 2 years. Well, 1 was distance through school. Then she's been homeschooled through a different, an Abeka program through the States. And she's never been subjected to those questions. And so she said, I'm a girl. And the doctor was like, oh, okay, so you like girls. And she's like, no, I am a girl.
Wow, and it's so crazy the doctor would just go right to that.
Yeah, and what's interesting is Mackenzie was like Laura Ingalls Wilder. So very, very girly and very innocent, at the same time very wise. But she was like, within this, she's like, I like boys. Oh, you want to be a boy? And she's like, no. And I'm sitting there, and Mackenzie's looking at me, but she knew that I would jump in, which I did. And she's like, no, I'm a girl and I like boys. And I looked at her and I said, you heard her right. Like, she's a girl and she likes boys. And so after that meeting, Mackenzie's like, Mommy, she goes like, wow. She goes, you weren't kidding when you said that they could be asking questions and then make it seem like I didn't know what I was saying. And the sad things about kids that go into the hospital, especially with this diagnosis as well, is that they have to grow up really quickly. And she got to see that adults, sadly, are not genuine and that they're out for other purpose outside of helping her. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So after that, that was one of the interesting things. I was still locked out of her account, so I couldn't see any of the test results that had been placed up there. Plus, they refused to give me her clinical notes because I wanted a second opinion. When they did the bone aspiration, which is horrible all on its own, after that, I went and consulted with a couple of my colleagues, and I was like, I don't know what to do. They want me to sign off on another one. And I'd already signed off on the one, so they would basically leave us alone. But now they're saying it's not conclusive, so they did another one, and then they came in 3 days later and informed me that they found cancer and that it was acute lymphoblastic leukemia. So, and that they were automatically, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I think there might be a little delay. So what is the procedure, the bone aspiration? What is that?
So for these kids, which most parents don't realize, the bone aspiration is though they do the lumbar puncture at the same time. So that's where they assess to see if cancer, too. They'll assess initially to see if cancer is in the cerebral fluid as well as within the brain. And then for the lumbar puncture, they're taking they do a small hole, drill a small hole, and they go in and they pull out a little percentage of the bone to do a biopsy. And in that biopsy, there's 2 ways they'll spin it, or they can see based on how things are breaking down if cancer is present, or they slice it into very minute pieces, very thin, to be able to get a proper diagnosis under a microscope to see if there are blasts within her bone.
Okay, so what did they diagnose her with?
Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Now,
you said earlier that you think that she may have been misdiagnosed at the time.
1,000%.
1,000%. So what do you think was going on, and why did they misdiagnose, do you think?
She went, when they did her blood work, the first thing they asked me when they came back, they said, are you giving her vitamin B supplements? And I said, no. Mackenzie has MTHFR anyway. Mm-hmm. So I said, no, foods work best for her anyway. And they said, okay, that's weird. And I said, how is that weird? And they're like, well, her B results, B12, were showing at 2,940. And her folate levels were showing at 948. And I'm like, okay, so I said, with the diagnosis of ALL, there is literature that shows that, because I was doing research at this time. I had my computer and I was like plugged in to try to figure out any way to be able to get answers. I said, so if you have really high numbers, there are children that have been diagnosed with ALL. When they've been sent to more of an integrative approach with other specialists, they find out that it's that the person is vitamin B deficient, not converting it properly. Their intestines are not, it's either secretory IgA is high, which is the lining of the intestine, or low, right? And I was like, so I passed on the data to them and they ignored it.
Well, it's interesting too, because the B vitamins are necessary for mitochondrial respiration and to make ATP. So lowered energy could be the result of just that, you know?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and I was like, so then I was contacting, oh my gosh, I was looking for any specialist outside of the hospital that I could work with. I was looking for anybody that would take her on. Canada is so afraid. I have never seen so many cowards in my whole entire life, even within the alternative sector within Canada. I reached out to the naturopathic college. They wouldn't touch her with a 10-foot pole because they would lose their license. I was looking for alternative treatments because kids don't have the rights that adults do. And there's more than just the fact that based under the governing statutes that are set up, like there's other components that are linked to that I've since learned. So I was trapped within the hospital with nowhere else to go unless I could get an oncologist who operated with children, who worked with children, not operated, but worked with kids to provide some sort of treatment for her. And at the time, neither one of us took, we haven't done vaccines since the little part and all that. So we weren't getting the C19. Canada is locked down. Right. You can't literally leave unless I guess if there's an underground railroad for us here, which I haven't discovered yet, but we couldn't leave. And even when I consulted in Mexico, for instance, I couldn't get her results. So no one could give me a definitive if they felt that whatever her diagnosis was legit, because I still couldn't get them. So they held us. You couldn't even
get a second opinion even in Canada, and you couldn't leave because this was a couple of years ago, right? Or a year or so ago.
That was in November, and we're still locked down. So unless you're vaccinated, you can't travel.
So let me just make sure I understand this correctly. So they diagnosed her with the cancer, but they told you she had elevated B vitamin levels and folate levels. And so you said earlier that you thought that she was misdiagnosed. Was your thinking that she was misdiagnosed based on those B and folate levels, or something different?
As well as they'd said that she had precocious anemia.
Okay.
Right. So if you look at any of the journals based on both of those elements alone, if a person is so deficient and has a genetic factor that's messing with their anemia, right? Or with her blood levels. And then the B component, there are so many journals that would point to at least addressing that first, because Mackenzie told them even before starting treatment that she was feeling better.
That's crazy. So the thing that's really shocking and scary is that when the hospital comes back with a diagnosis, it's not like they can change that diagnosis or you can get a second opinion and get that. Once that diagnosis is there, then all of a sudden you're just in the system. And now, unless you do what they tell you to do because of the diagnosis, you're going to be an unfit parent. And the story goes along that way. But that's just crazy. Yeah,
sadly, what they'll do is one of the doctors came in because Mackenzie didn't want to do treatment at all. I contacted two of my friends and I reached out to a human rights lawyer through a friend, and they let me know that no matter what road we were going down, CAS was going to become a part of it. And that then I had I worked within an office with a naturopath who, when he was in Egypt, he was trained as an oncologist. And then coming over here, he switched to naturopath. And, I only got 4 pages of her. So we were told on a Friday, and I said, I'm not doing anything. I said, I want a second opinion. So then the whole weekend I was trying to get people to help me out. Then on the Monday, I finally had, this one naturopath doctor get back to me, and he's like, well, and he, sadly, what I find sad is that he's into naturopath, but he also supports traditional chemotherapy and radiation, which I had a very hard time with that. And I still have a very hard time with that. And he's like, well, unless you get her full medical with notes, I can't advise you at all anyway. So then finally got that. I only got 4 pages. So then I had to fight to get the rest of them. But by that time, it was the Monday. Mm-hmm. And they were like, she's basically not going to make it if you don't do anything. I couldn't find anybody else to help. So then Mackenzie's like, I don't want to do this. So then I consulted with one of the doctors and I said, just out of curiosity, I said, so what happens if a child decides they don't want to, given that she's operating under mature minor doctrine here within the hospital? And she goes,
right.
Oh, that never.
Yeah, you would think they could opt out. You would think.
Yeah. And she goes, oh, that never happens. I said, what do you mean that never happens? And she's like, oh, we convince them. I said, what do you mean you convince them? She goes, oh, we'll send in our specialists, our psychiatrists, our social worker, and we'll make sure that the child makes the right decision for themselves. I said, so you use coercion.
Man, so what would happen if Mackenzie was just so strong-willed that she just refused? It can be said that all disease stems from the inability for the body to generate ATP. Did you know that magnesium is required to generate energy? It's required for proper gene transcription of over 913 genes via the nuclear receptor VDR. It's required to synthesize the vitamin D molecule. It's required for heavy metal detoxification and converting thyroid hormone T4 to T3 in your liver. 3,751 of your 9,000 enzymes need magnesium to function. That's 42%. It's also required to reduce oxidation, and it's the number one mineral lost due to stress. Just avoid oxide and citrate as they blow up ceruloplasmin levels. That's why I like Mag ATP from Mitolife. 3 capsules is 400 milligrams of bioavailable magnesium. It will change your life. Check it out on biochargeme.com and use the code EHR15 to get a 15% discount. Would they have to acquiesce?
I can tell you what ended up happening after this part. So because they ended up removing her capacity.
Oh, I remember you said that. Yes, yes.
So she was like, Mommy, I don't know what to do. And at that time, I didn't know where else to take her. And I knew that CIS has, so in Hamilton here in Ontario, that's where I am, a young boy, 11-year-old boy, was given the cancer diagnosis, and they didn't want to do it anymore either. CIS swept in so quickly, removed the child from the care of the parents. The parents went into the court system to fight to get them back. During that time, they made sure to draw it out long enough that they got them through the first round of the induction phase of cancer treatment. Then the parents, only by stating that they would continue with treatment, did they get their son back.
Gosh, such coercion.
Yes. And if there's any way that this stops, this prevents what happened to me to someone else, because Mackenzie wanted to tell the story. It wasn't even supposed to be mine. Her whole goal was to get to a place that she could start sharing this with others and to figure out a way to use the system in a way that we could possibly get her out that way. Because I had 2 lawyers. I had my own lawyer and her lawyer, and we couldn't get her out of the treatment. And she went into remission in November. So they don't tell you that. So this is another really cool thing about the medical system. All children, 95 to 98% of children using the ALL treatment go into remission within the first month, but they don't use remission. The cancer isn't active, is how they'll say it. And they make sure to say it really low. And then to like steamroll over it. So you don't even pay attention to it and just go into the next phase. Mm-hmm. But these children, all go into remission, and they don't get a choice to choose, which an adult does. Once you're in remission, the adult gets a choice. Kids don't. So Mackenzie didn't even get through. So we began the treatment. Mackenzie had a heart murmur. The way the PICC line is positioned, it goes right up through the main artery. And even if you do a port, it's the same thing. But we did PICC because 1, we were hoping to be able to get her out. And 2, it's a less invasive surgery, and she reacted to anesthesia really bad. She's always been sensitive to that. And then it didn't matter even what we changed her to try to find the right support for her. She could not detoxify properly from it, and it would store, and then she would feel really unwell. So they started with vindiquistin and daunorubicin, and those are like a 15-minute treatment, but both of them are very toxic. Mm-hmm. When you have the nurses come in and wearing like hazmat outfits while you're sitting beside your daughter as they're injecting her, and saying that it's safe, like they're all so just trapped in some sort of delusional state. And when I'd sit beside Mackenzie, I could feel the treatment in her. I don't know how to explain that, but she and I had such a connection. I could feel it course through her, and I would feel like it was just awful. So we got through that, and then we were really concerned about the asparaginase. They use E. coli to treat cancer. So asparaginase has PEG and polysorbate 80 in it. Mackenzie, I knew, reacted to that, but I couldn't prove it with her vaccines as a kid. And so Dr. Gupta, who is one of the head, he was overseeing Mackenzie. He was like, oh yeah, so normally we give all the children medication so you don't know if they're reacting. I said, are you crazy? Like, Mackenzie wants to know what's going on in her body. How can we ever navigate this properly? In my own naivety at that time, thinking, hey, if she reacts to it, then they're not going to force other things on her, which was completely naive. Which, if I had my time back, but anyways. And so he said, oh, in my 15 years, I've never seen anybody react to asparaginase for the first time, but the second time, 100%. So we're going to medicate her. And I said, no, we'll have that discussion because Mackenzie gets to have a say. And Mackenzie was like, I don't feel safe doing this. And he's like, oh, it's never happened before. So he's like, oh, I'm still on the floor. So if anything happens, let me know. So Tuesday was the first treatment. Friday was the next one. And they did a lumbar puncture, which was an injection of chemo into her spine. And that's horrible all on its own. And then in the afternoon, they did the asparaginase. And long story short with that, I was making her a sandwich and I was sitting there with her and she goes, you're not going to leave me. I said, oh my gosh, no. She didn't want me going to the bathroom or anything. And I'm like, no, I'm here. And she's like, I don't feel right about this. And I said, I don't either. And then they gave her the first treatment. And within 15 seconds, she was having full out anaphylaxis. And it looked like someone had punched her in the face. So she was having angioedema all around her eyes. They were purple. They were like scarlet almost. And she had broken out. So between Tuesday to Friday, they had started her with prednisone, which is their magic elixir. And she reacted to prednisone. But without prednisone, cancer treatment can't work, everybody. So if you're not suppressing the immune system, it doesn't work because you're poisoning your child or yourself. So of course you have to trick your body into turning off your immune system and suppressing it so low so it can actually get in at the cancer. And yes, I'm being very sarcastic.
Yeah. So at this point, Trina, you know a whole lot because you've been researching for a lot of years. You must just be going crazy at this point because
my skin was crawling.
Yeah, because all you're thinking about is I got to get my child out of this hospital to begin the healing process, right?
Yeah. And she was like, Mommy, you're going to save me, right? So that was really hard because, sorry.
No, I can only imagine. Because
we had been through so much leading up to her 12 years. And she had been in such a wonderful place. And I had miraculously, for me, it's with God's help, so miraculously been able to fight and pull her out and keep her out of the system. And now I'm smack back in the system that I, uneducated and sadly not trusting my own instincts at the time, had enabled her to jeopardize her health in the past anyway. So now I'm sitting looking at my 12-year-old who is amazing. Look at me and say, you are going to make this okay. So that made me work even harder, if I could even work harder, to try to find a solution. And with this reaction, that's where they learned that she is deathly allergic to polysorbate 80 and PEG. And that she needed a double EpiPen to stop the anaphylaxis. She lost her vision. She was not able to, she was screaming. Like, all I can remember is just screaming, make it stop. Her brain was on fire. So her blood-brain barrier was forced open, of course, right? Because that's how all of this wonderful system works. And when Dr. Gupta came down to there was about 20 professionals that came down when she had the reaction. I told them to stop. As soon as I saw her, and she thought that she choked on what she was eating. And I knew it was because she had anaphylaxis as a kid, but she couldn't remember it. And so I was like, okay, I said, turn it off. I said, stop the process, turn it off. And I was like, okay, Mackenzie, just focus on me, focus on my voice. Because with mast cell activation, it doesn't matter if you give an EpiPen, because the body, you're fighting with epinephrine. Epinephrine's being released anyways. You're literally fighting the body with an outside synthetic source when the inside source is trying to protect you. But in the hospital, they deem anaphylaxis as part of the process of cancer treatment. Mm-hmm. So they came running, gave her the one. She was screaming to make it stop. And this went on for 2.5 hours. And she broke out in these, so she would never have a full out hive per se, but she would have these deep purple blotches throughout her entire body, all the way down to her toes. And then her throat would close over, and her heart, and then her blood pressure went completely off the charts. And then everything plummeted, and they thought they were going to lose her, and they were considering looking at a defibrillator because they couldn't get it to stop. So that's why they gave her the second one. But before they gave her the second one, I was like, that's a mistake. You're going to make this worse. And it made it worse. So then she just continued screaming. And literally I've never seen, it was like her eyes were hemorrhaging. And, that went on for 2.5 hours, and they were running saline. So for what worked for Mackenzie was, if saline was continuously running, the salt would actually her body worked much better, even though that's not natural salt, but it worked much better with that to help calm things down. But it took that long for her to stop screaming and to calm everything down. And then Dr. Gupta took me outside, and he goes, wow, I've never seen that in my 15 years. And he goes, you weren't kidding, because my comment to him pre-treatment, I said, listen, I'm 1 in the 10,000 that an epidural failed on. And I didn't even want an epidural, but my body just shut down, anyways, a whole different topic. And right. He's like, you weren't kidding that you're 1 in a 10,000. And I'm like, that's not funny. I said, so my child doesn't get to be your experiment where you're not thinking. I said, you thought I was coming in here as just one of those concerned mothers that, over vigilant and, hyper, too protective, a helicopter mom. I said, no, I'm coming in letting you know that my daughter has mast cell issues that you have no knowledge. And he let me know. He said within sick kids, they had no one in there that knew about mast cell. They had no one in there to know how to navigate this. I said, mast cell is part of what cancer is, if it's cancer. And I said, and you're not even addressing that. I referred them. A friend of mine was sending me stuff when I was in the hospital, and I referred them to 2 mast cell specialists in Toronto. He refused to contact. So he goes, well, just want to let you know, since she reacted to this, she has a 50% chance of making it. Now, for me, that was a celebratory note, because I knew the less chance she had of making it successfully through treatment, they had less power over her, and I'd be able to pull her.
Right.
So I wasn't. So when that bothered them, though, yes, he expected me to cry over that. And I was like, okay, so what's the next stage then? He goes, well, Erwinia can be used, and Erwinia is free of, he said, I think she might be allergic to PEG. So we're going to send her blood off. And they did all that. So he said, well, Erwinia would be used. And I said, okay, is that still E. coli? And he goes, yes. I said, she's still going to react to that. And he goes, well, let's see. So then I was letting Mackenzie know, look, we might have a way to be able to navigate this. And I was still reaching out to people. And then I was informed by I contact friends who's in the social services, and they're like, yeah, 100% you'll lose her. 100% you're in the hospital. You're still in the inpatients part. 100%. Right. I said, okay, all right, let's see about getting her out. So when we got to outpatients, they were following us very closely. They did Erwinia with Mackenzie, which she reacted to. Okay. So then we were finished that. So then Mackenzie was like, Mommy, I don't want to do this anymore. And I said, I'm with you. I said, I'll be working to find someone that we can work with, and we'll figure this out. Mm-hmm. So when we went in, keep in mind, she went in with a 80% chance of success rate. Lost that because of the reacting to the asparaginase. Then the Erwinia she reacted to. So literally, Mackenzie only had vincristine and donirubicin, and she still went into a remissive state.
That is unreal.
Yep. And they wouldn't even tell me that. I read her blood work. And in the blood work, her white blood cells was stable. And I had a friend of mine review them as well. And they're like, yeah, she's in remission. And one of the doctors had let me know, they word it really, really, really. So this doesn't happen very often, but, which is a lie. Your child, the cancer is dormant. And I was like, okay, cool. So we go home. We're sent back to speak with Dr. Gupta, and Mackenzie lets him know. She goes, I don't want to do this. And he's like looking at her like, So
you actually got to go home?
We went home. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we were home. So we were held there for 3 weeks initially, though.
Jeez. Wow.
So then we got to go home. When we're home, and we got to go to inpatients, she said, I don't want to do this anymore. And he looked at her and he goes, well, you get to make a decision. Now, he thought she was going to choose to do it anyways. And he said, you haven't, let us know. This is your decision. We can't make you do anything. So a 12-year-old kid who, really bright, you tell a child that, they're like, okay, well, it's my decision. Plus,
yeah, you would think they would believe it. Yeah.
Right. At that time, she still had her mature minor doctrine. So she was still being given consent. Not consent, capacity.
Right.
Okay. She was still being able to have capacity. And so, next thing happens, Mackenzie goes, Mommy, I can't do this. And I'm like, I stand beside you. No, 100%. And I was like, so excited because, I was working with a Dr. Verboa who'd help with cannabis. So we had used that as pain support, which Mackenzie didn't have pain support. It didn't have pain per se because I'd been using that instead of the synthetic. The one thing that she was struggling with is after the lumbar punctures, because they had 3 in the first month. Because like for an adult, when you have 1 lumbar puncture, it takes a year to heal. But, for kids, they're resilient, right? You can just slam them as many as possible.
Yeah. And
by the 3rd one, she told them that she was struggling to walk. And I noticed it. I noticed her inability to lift her legs properly. She was walking more like a senior than a child. And she couldn't open up bottles or doors anymore. And when we told them that, and she had pain radiating down her left leg, and I was like, sadly, with me having a C-section, I could remember what it was like. And very similar, even though an epidural, they're not the same, but they still are piercing into your spine.
Right.
And I was like, she would say, I don't feel right after the lumbar puncture. And the nurse was like, oh, you're fine. And I'm like, don't tell my daughter she's fine. If she's telling you she doesn't feel right, she knows her body 1,000% better than you do. And so that was something that I brought up to them as well. So, on the day that we decided not to do the next, lumbar puncture to begin the next phase and the bone aspiration, the hospital was like really upset because I'd been transferred from Dr. Gupta's to Dr. Pundit's, who's a whole bunch of special. Her care and outpatients. So we were home and I contacted them and I said, well, Mackenzie has made that decision and I support her. And, as long as the cancer is not active, and you have to be really careful because there are only 2 Indigenous children in Ontario that have ever been able to get out of treatment. And the reason up here is the Indigenous operate under a completely different legal system than we do. So these 2 children who had the same diagnosis as Mackenzie, both parents, the child was really suffering with the treatment. And they were operating out of McMaster though, which is another wonderful, child torture facility.
Yeah, I bet.
And I know a lot of people are going to be upset listening to this and like, oh, but the hospital saved me. And I appreciate that a lot of people feel that the medical establishment is actually there to help us. And if they actually knew what was being done to their kids, I think they might see it differently. So these 2 children were able to be free, but they had to go through, so the military has a private court system, right? So does the hospital. And they operate under a Form G. So they were both taken through Form G. One child was found capable, the other child wasn't. So then they had to be taken to, then the parents are tried.
My God,
to see if they're
tried
capable.
for what?
Yeah. So within the system, this is where I was heading, where Mackenzie and I headed. They are tried to see if the parent is being negligent, because as a secondary decision maker, and legally the role of a secondary decision maker is to work in the best needs of that child, even if it ticks off the hospital. However, how the hospital will twist it is that you are being negligent for your child and placing them at adverse risk. Right. And as a result of doing that, you are harmful for your child. So CAS will then be called in to handle all that. Mm-hmm. So those two children were actually able to get free. So I actually contacted the lawyer for one of those children, but where I was an Aboriginal, they didn't want to get involved. So then I was searching high and low in the meantime to look for someone on December 16th, because my request to the hospital is, let's still do the blood work. I will do it through a lab here. Meanwhile, I was using RSO to help Mackenzie place her into remissive state.
Rick Simpson oil. Yeah.
So, which is not allowed here at all. So then that was an extra concern. And she was
Wait a second. So Trina, the Rick Simpson oil is not available or not allowed up there. So are you saying that was an extra obstacle, meaning that they found out you were doing that and they could label you as an unfit parent, or what did you mean by that?
If they found out, yes.
Okay. I see.
Yeah. So I could use cannabis, which I had a prescription for. If I was using Rick Simpson, which I could make myself, right? If I was using that with her, that would be considered outside of, one, my scope, two, health and safety of the child, even though they can give synthetic cannabis to children within the hospital, which they do. But if I was giving her the real thing, I was placing her at risk.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So December 16th is when, without us being told, they did a assessment of Mackenzie. And in that assessment, my daughter, I wish I had Zoom video chat, like Zoomed, tape that meeting, because you weren't supposed to, because that's a hospital policy. I've never seen a 12-year-old speak so eloquently about mast cell histamine treatment, reactions that she'd had, her concern for her safety, that them telling her that she's going to die without the treatment, that she could die with the treatment, and that cancer is listed as an adverse secondary cause on the journals, and I was just sitting there in awe. And then I realized as they were doing this, I'm like, are you guys assessing her? And they're like, well, yes, we are. I said, well, you didn't let us know. And it kind of worked to our favor to a degree, because they would have then said that I had prepped her for this. Right? Oh, but I didn't. Right. At that time, though, even though Mackenzie actually, if an adult had responded in the way that Mackenzie had, 1,000%, not that they would have to, that they would have been like, oh, okay, ticked off with the adult for probably not continuing with the treatment. Okay. But then like, okay, you're lost, basically, right? Thinking that, of course, you can't save yourself outside of the system.
Right.
With exactly. Mackenzie, they turned it around and removed her capacity. That devastated Mackenzie. Like, if anything out of all of this broke her spirit, was that.
So it was almost as if she was too good at explaining things, and as a result of that, they took her capacity away, which changed the course of everything, right?
Yes. And sadly, she grew up with me. So not meaning it's sadly for me, but I've always educated both my kids regarding all aspects. Like, anaphylaxis is the body's way of warning, put it in child, like based on their age, stay away from, it's your warning system. Mm-hmm. The hospital was trying to change the definitions of how the body reacts to make it as part of the process to becoming well. And, she would sit there and be like, but that's a lie. She goes like, why are they lying? And because at 12, it's like, there's no gray, right? At least for some kids, there's literally, there's not even a little bit of like, okay, some of that makes sense, but no, it was like, that's true. That's not. And she's like, why are they lying? And I said, because part of their system is that you are to destroy what you've been given to rebuild it better in their mind and to kill it off. So when we found out that her capacity had been removed, we received a letter that they had contacted CAS. And in this letter, Dr. Pundit, who I've reported to the Ontario College of Physicians, as well as Dr. oh my gosh, I'm blanking now. Dr. Punnett with Dr. Whitlock. And I have more to report. She lied to CAS and said that Mackenzie needed to be resuscitated when she was brought into the hospital, which was a complete lie.
So they just made that up?
Yep. And that's how they activated the CAS. And
so what happens as a result of her losing her capacity? What does that mean?
When you lose the capacity up here, I become secondary decision maker. That means if I don't do it, if I don't become the bludgeoning hand of the hospital, then I'm deemed incapable as a parent and they take me to court.
So who's the primary then if she's not? The hospital? No, it would be me and me not obeying the hospital. So if they removed me, CAS would. And then they would follow whatever wonderful lines because CAS does not operate however CAS was designed or whatever BS we were told about CAS, that it was to protect the children. I do realize there are some families that have horrible, horrible things happen. And I'm not belittling that. But there's, let's say, 90% of the population that actually wouldn't do that for the 10%. And then they override. Right. And the hospital literally uses them as the militant arm. And so then I get a visit out here. They can't touch me out here. They can only really touch me in the hospital. And she was great. She did stress to me that she was not knowledgeable in any aspect of cancer, nor did she want to be. And that unless I could find an oncologist, because I told her I was looking for a second opinion, unless I could find another oncologist who would provide whatever alternative treatment, that I was going to find myself in big trouble. Discovered in 1922, vitamin E has to be one of the most misunderstood vitamins in the world. Essentially, it acts as a super powerful antioxidant, and it does this by donating electrons, which lowers oxidation, aka rust, from iron overload inside the body. But it's also a super powerful estrogen antagonist, so it's amazing for hormone health as well. A deficiency in vitamin E could result in age spots on your skin, hormone dysregulation, the inability to get pregnant or to carry a pregnancy full term, bedwetting in children, fatty liver disease, arterial blockages, cancers, skin or connective tissue issues. Essentially, vitamin E donates electrons and lowers oxidation all over the body. So it's amazing for any vision issues, nerve damage, calcification, iron overload, and so much more. That's why I like MitoLife PUFA Protect. One capsule contains 1,000 milligrams of mixed tocopherols. Use the code EHR15 on biochargeme.com and get some today. And what did that what kind of threat is that? I mean,
and I looked at her and I was like, so unless I do exactly what the hospital says, you're going to support the hospital and then I'm in big trouble.
Yeah.
So she left and that was fine. And I would always email her everything. So all the documentation going back and forth, me in the hospital. And so I had been advised by a lawyer friend. She's like, listen, you need to get as much written down from them as possible. Dr. Punnett would do that a little bit. Dr. Gupta wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole because he knew that could be used in a court of law. And Laura wouldn't either. So it was really hard to get things. And then they forbid you to videotape things. So I did videotape one session. But I couldn't get enough.
You can't record anything on your phone when you're in the hospital?
Oh, no. So on the inpatients, I recorded every reaction, took pictures. On the outpatients, it's posted on every single wall that you are not allowed to take pictures or videotape anything.
What kind of
Because in inpatients, they can call CAS on you and flip a switch. In outpatients, they can't hold you.
It's unreal. It's just so obvious. I mean, why would they be doing that? It makes no sense unless you understand what's really going on.
Yep. So then I was using RSO. She was doing really well. Her blood work was coming back fine. They couldn't understand why. So get this, there is no documentation, no journals over in Canada or the United States to disprove what I was doing. They only could show me one journal, which was from China. And these families that decided not to continue with treatment was because they saw the adverse reactions and death because of treatment, as well as misdiagnosis, as well as the families just chose not to do it.
So who were these families that chose not to do it? So
I have the journal, which I can send to you after. They don't break it down per se. They try to belittle them and make it seem like they're not educated. But had nothing to do with the education. It had to do with the parents wanting to protect their kids. And it was really interesting is that there was a boy to girl ratio too, which was kind of cool, but that's the only journal they could provide to disprove me pulling Mackenzie and supporting Mackenzie with her wishes. Only one journal out of the whole world.
God. Oh my God. Okay. So what happened next?
So had her in remission February. So it got really cold here in February, well, which it is anyways, but it was like really bitter. And we went for a walk on a Friday. I had to pull back the Rick Simpson by 4 grains. And that made a huge difference. She had a flare in her knee. Now, when we initially went in, I also asked them to test for Lyme and a whole bunch of other things just to rule everything out. Another thing to know in Canada, Sick Kids does not test adequately for GI map, like anything to do with stool samples. They allowed the stool to go into to their urine. You can't get a proper test from that. They don't do a comprehensive stool analysis, and they don't do any Lyme testing. So they'll tell you that they do, but they don't.
So at this time, Trina, were you, so Mackenzie has obviously, had some treatments, and at this time, were you still trying to pursue an alternative diagnosis?
Yeah, I was trying. So I had reached out to functional doctors. I couldn't find anybody to help her. I did have a naturopath who was following her and supporting her kidneys and those types of things. He has gone up against Sick Kids 4 times and lost.
But a naturopath wouldn't be recognized, right, by the government. They wouldn't recognize a naturopath's, diagnosis.
So they didn't help me. And then the functional doctors, I reached out to someone in the States, but he was a consultant. Reached out in Calgary. They was like, yeah, no. No one wanted to work with the kids, and no one wanted to touch her. So what got interesting is once I had a lawyer and Mackenzie had a lawyer, Mackenzie's lawyer was reaching out to get extra help for us as well, because they were so impressed, 1, with Mackenzie, but 2, the fact that she was in a remissive state, and 3, to try to find some support for her. They were contacting in BC to other doctors. None of them wanted to touch her with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
So I'm like, what do I do? Like, how do I fly her out of here? I can't fly her out. I didn't know anybody that could possibly, get us on a flight that would permit XYZ, us who weren't going to.
But what do you think would have happened had she, even let's say within Canada, you were able to get a secondary diagnosis that was, anemia, pernicious anemia, or some other diagnosis that she could have had, and this, in fact, was not cancer. Would they recognize a secondary diagnosis even if it was from a medical doctor, or would they just stick to the original one because there's, they wanted to make an example out of her or whatever it was?
Unless it was an oncologist that was like, yep, I totally support what this doctor has found. You're right. They likely wouldn't have.
So even if you got a secondary diagnosis that wasn't cancer, you don't think it would have helped?
No, because I even went so far as there's the RCBG test that is a genetic test that will, and if I got that name wrong, just forgive me, but that test is in the States. And I consulted with Dr. Gupta and I said, listen, I'm looking at getting this test. It's like, it was a $1,200 test. I'm like, I will get it for her. And it's so cool. I was like, not that I'm big on mining anybody's DNA at all, but it would be so great to know what treatment would work best for her. And his comment to me was, sure, you can go that route, Trina, but it doesn't really matter. If her genes don't like the treatment we're giving her, the treatment's being given anyways, because genes can be taught to bend.
Unreal.
So when everything went down the way it did, we did the blood work on Valentine's Day. What a wonderful day that was. And her knee was swollen, but I was like, there's something we're missing. And I knew that we were going to have to go in if I couldn't find someone else, and I couldn't at that time. And they called me 9:00 that night and said cancer was showing in her blood. And that's when I pulled back by the 4 strains of Rick Simpson, because you have to stay at the gram a day for 90 days anyways, right? And I was just getting things, it was very slow to help getting things up for her. So we end up back in the hospital, and it becomes relentless and worse. So we get into the hospital. They want to actually put her under surgery. to scrape her knee without even knowing what was going on in there. And the pediatric specialist, joint specialist, was against it, thank God. Yeah. And they did an aspiration of the knee, because first they came in, when I went in, they were like, oh, I just want to let you know that we think that it's possibly cancer and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, well, we're not moving ahead with anything unless we know what it is. And it looks like it's fluid, but we don't know why. So when the guy that did the aspiration was actually amazing. And so they did the aspiration, and he goes, look, it looks really clear. He showed it to us and everything. He goes, this looks really good. Okay. And he's like, so I'm not worried. And he goes, and he let us know after only macrophages and neutrophils were in there. And that's a mast cell response. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right? And I was like, so what's going on? So he told the team she didn't need antibiotics. So I tried to get her off antibiotics because she reacts to them anyways. And what they do to the body is horrible. And they said no. So this was the first initial stage of weakening her body further because she can't tolerate them. And when he came back with the test results, he said, I just want to let you know there's no cancer there. And he goes, she had some sort of immune response, but he said, we can't figure what it is. We've done cultures. They've all come back negative. We're not even sure what caused this. So, oh, by the way, why is she on antibiotics? And I'm like, they put her on it because of infection. He goes, but she's not infected. He goes, he was like, you need to take her off that. He goes, I'm telling you. And he showed me the paper. He goes, I told him specifically not to put them on that. So by this time now, we were 4 days in with this particular time. And
it's just amazing to me at this time that they would be willing to do a surgery when someone, if they are saying that she has cancer, you know, it's just amazing that you would put someone through a surgery, which is incredibly difficult to get through and requires a huge immune response and resources in the body. During a time in which someone, you know, has cancer, you know, at least in their mind, it's just amazing what they're willing to do. I mean, you can see it's a total money grab.
Oh, big time. And, with her, so they kept asking her also to be a part of a study, and that she would help many children like her. And I'm like, what do you mean like her? And they're like, well, I said, because she's biracial? Like, yeah. And Mackenzie was like, I told you no already. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be a part of anything like that. And she knew that something was weird, but she couldn't articulate it. But she said, that's weird, Mommy, right? And I said, yes, you're right. And I said, I'm happy that you don't want to be a part of it, because I was going to say no anyway. Mm-hmm. So then they ended up, because they had her neutrophils were 90 when we went in. Right. So I had worked really hard to get those back up. And like, you know, within 12 hours of them taking blood from her to assess, to see and test her, they dropped them down to 20.
From 90.
Yep. And then they were like, oh, she needs platelets and she's going to need a blood transfusion.
And at some point during this, they told you she had cancer in the blood, right? Which wasn't true.
That's correct.
Golly. Okay.
So then they, and what's interesting about that is, so if an adult has cancer treatment, they will give them the 2 weeks if they request to let their neutrophils increase, because after 2 weeks, that tends to happen, right? Mm-hmm. Eating the right food, supporting yourself, blah, blah, blah. Kids, they don't. So she had been having blood transfusions on and off. So knowing that the majority of people up here, or a good majority of them, took C19, then we were always worried about the blood being contaminated. Mm-hmm. Which added an extra layer we were always worried about, because she would react to the blood product.
So one question I should have asked before in relation to C19 that you just brought up, it's my understanding that hospitals, specifically in Canada, would be requiring that sharp thing, right? Or did they not?
I'm not 100% sure. With the Children's Hospital, I don't know.
Interesting. Okay.
I don't know. I did know that Mackenzie never had blood clots or anything before treatment. And after treatment started, she would pass clots from her nose the size of my thumb. Do you know, did she get that, do you think? That she got contaminated blood?
No, did she get the injection?
No. That part, there was no biologic, so I just understand what you were saying, sorry. The biologic component, there was no added language for that. So okay. She asked, we never did it willingly, meaning if they went and did it while she was under, I would have known. Now there's stories that people have been given it. If you sign off on something that says, and all biologics, I didn't sign off on anything of that nature. I went in there completely jab free, and she was going in there jab free unless they did something sinister under the radar.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I had to speak in code because of our, YouTube and all these other.
Sorry. Yeah. I hope that didn't ruin your code.
No, that makes
sense. Kind of did a little bit. I'll work on it.
Okay. It's okay. It's okay.
I just clued in. So yeah. So no, she was never given anything with a spike, not knowingly, at all. But I did notice after transfusions, odd bleeding outside of her having what they labeled as cancer being a concern for her. So then they ended up giving her more blood products. She reacted to that. Then Dr. Whitlock comes in on the Thursday because she developed an autoimmune, I'm going to mispronounce this, Round's disease. It looked like that on her hands. And when she would touch anything, it was hot or cold, she was in pain. So Dr. Whitlock, he's the head of oncology. He's the one that gave Mackenzie her official diagnosis. He comes in and he goes, yeah, this is out of my scope. And I said, it's out of your scope. I said, but this is occurring after antibiotics and, the last transfusion. So something has been triggered in her immune system. And he's like, yeah, we're just going to have someone else look at this. And he walked outside the door. So nothing was said to me about anything. I had requested that the lumbar puncture be put off from the Friday because they still had her on antibiotics and they were saying that she had some sort of infection. So I wanted the test results back. That Wednesday, I was told that was okay.
Okay. Thursday
night, I get a call from CAS, 9:00 at night. And they're like, Ms. Thornhill. I'm like, yes. And they're like, so just want to let you know, Dr. Whitlock had an emergency meeting and CAS has been enacted because they are saying that you are placing your daughter at risk. And should you in any way deviate from whatever their plan is, we will be coming in and resuming care of your child. I'm like, what are you talking about? In what way did I do anything? I said, all I requested is that the lumbar puncture be placed a day off. So we could get the test results back to make sure that she didn't have an active infection of any kind. So why would you want to put a child under with an active infection anyway?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And she's like, and I explained everything else to her. She goes, I don't think personally that this is a CAS issue. She goes, I think this is a hospital who is upset with a patient and a parent, and they want to use us to come in and be the heavy. She said, but I'm warning you, they already have everything. All the teams are notified. I was distraught. I called the lawyers because when we went back into the hospital, she and I already had a lawyer. Mackenzie was supposed to have her day in court because when the hospital enacted the Form G, you have to actually prove the child is incapable first before you come after the parent. The doctor didn't know that, so she thought she had already won by coming after me, even though I wasn't backing down anyways. It didn't matter. But they had to go and prove her incompetent or incapacity, didn't have the capacity first. Mm-hmm. So the day she was supposed to have her day in court, lack of a better word, because it was through Zoom, but it's through their private court system within the hospital, on the 16th of February. But we ended up back in the hospital and she wasn't strong enough. So then they put it off till March. Their lawyers told our lawyers, don't worry, CAS will never be called. They're fine. Don't worry. There's not going to be anything. She's going in. She's a responsible mother. Mackenzie's being responsible and coming back in. No harm is going to come to either one of them. Meanwhile, that Thursday, we're in there the Monday. By the Thursday, CAS is called again. And this is a different worker because we already had one. And then on the Friday, I get a call at 11 o'clock in the morning. And by this time, Mackenzie was supposed to go for the lumbar puncture. She wasn't feeling safe. She told the team that. She was always saying that. I don't feel safe. I feel like something's going to happen. You guys need to listen to me. Mackenzie could tell you everything about what everything was going on. So 11 o'clock in the morning, I get a call and she's like, so Ms. Thornhill, we've reviewed Mackenzie's files and you will be considered negligent should you not comply with everything that the hospital says. I said, who do I hold responsible for lying? And she's like, pardon? And I'm like, so Dr. Whitlock was in to see us yesterday, did not take me out in the hall, did not ask me, we're concerned XYZ, did not send anybody in to speak with us regarding any of this. I said, I wasn't to understand that should CAS be enacted, you get a 5-day stay where you get to then prove your case.
Right.
And I said, they said, oh no, they pulled an emergency measure on you. And she goes, when an emergency measure is pulled, that means that within 24 hours we're activated and the parent doesn't get a say. I said, so they lied and said that I wasn't going to do any of the procedure, which I did not do. Neither did my child. And I said, so now you guys are going to be all over us and trying to force us because they can't get us to do what you want. And it's not even can't get us to do what you want. You guys, the hospital can't handle having a conversation with someone who is intelligent enough to question them on what's going on. And the child is also questioning about their procedure. So now you're going to be used. And she said, I'm just letting you know. Now, when I got the documents, because I forced the hospital and to release them to me, in that document, they actually had ordered security to monitor us. And if over the weekend, because up here, the Monday was a family day, yippee, where we're stuck in the hospital, and held there because we could have gone home, but they wanted us to stay until the following week again. They told everybody if we were to go to the doors to leave, that we were to be taken and to be held without the ability to leave our rooms until CAS was coming in to see us on Tuesday.
So you saw this written in the paperwork.
Mm-hmm. And he lied, and I've got all of it. That's why I reported him. He lied. He took information that wasn't true, and he reported it. And that Friday, after I got off with the social worker, I met him in the hallway, and I confronted him in front of all the parents that were there. I didn't care. I said, what did you do? He goes, what are you talking about? I said, why did you enact CAS? What are you talking about? And there's a certain system, and I'm blanking on the name, that you have to enact. And he goes, I enacted this. I said, yes, but you enacted it. Why? And he goes, well, I was told that you were declining doing the lumbar puncture. I said, you were in my room on Thursday. Why didn't you ask? And he goes, oh. And he goes, I'll deal with you later. I have a patient to go deal with. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You're going to deal with me later. And he left. So when I got to read the report, he had followed the process. He had involved Dr. Pundit, who I've also reported. And he had called together the nursing team, the full oncology team, as well as the social work support within the hospital, mm-hmm. To enact something that was false.
My God. It's just like these are the people that are supposedly trying to help your daughter heal and giving her the best treatments and caring about her. But really, do you think at this point they're kind of going after you and your daughter because you're educated and you're smart and you're asking questions? Or what do you think is going on in their mind at this point?
I think I became a problem for them. Mm-hmm. And I think Mackenzie became a problem for them. And from what I gather, we were the first people within the oncology team to be doing what we were doing. And if it was known, because it gets even worse in regard to how malicious they were, if it was proven that a child could do 1 month of induction and be cured, right? Mm-hmm. Mackenzie was supposed to be part of their program for 2 years. Okay. The financial, one of the stats that was sent to me a while back, and I can't, if I find it again, I'll send to you. There is, one of them suggested that each child in cancer treatment is worth $1.2 million. Okay. So if I went and proved that their system was flawed and wrong, Mackenzie was able to kick cancer with not even doing a full treatment. How is that going to look for their whole setup that they have within the hospitals and how they treat children? Because adults don't even get put through treatment that long. Boys get to go 2.5 years. Girls are 2 years.
So, I mean, they're looking at you as a real problem then.
Yep. And at that time, it hadn't hit me yet because you're right in the middle of fighting for your child, how much trouble we were in.
So at the very beginning, what do you think was going on? Do you think that there was a special case because she was biracial or, from the initial diagnosis, do you think they just got it wrong, or do you think they purposefully got it wrong? What are your thoughts on how this whole thing started? Like, what was their motivation, do you think?
When we sat, like, it was just me, by the way. So when I sat in with 5 other doctors, because you weren't allowed to have anybody else in there at that time, it was only 1 parent per child. That's the way, because of COVID is so scary. So when I was sitting in there, the head of hematology looks at me and he goes, Trina, we knew there was something there, and we were digging and digging, and we're digging so hard to find it. And I'm looking at them, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in so much trouble. And he goes, we couldn't find it until all of a sudden, Dr. Whitlock found it. And I looked down at Dr. Whitlock, and the absolute look of glee, if you can see, radiating from the top part of his eyes. And I looked down at him and I said, what do you mean? You're a specialist of blood and you couldn't find what was wrong with her? And Dr. Whitlock was sent in to miraculously find out she had cancer? And the look of, he was excited. And I was sick to my stomach, and I wasn't crying because of the diagnosis of cancer. I was literally crying because I knew I had walked into the pit of hell, and that I was going to be trapped in here with her unless a miracle happened, and that they were looking for another avenue. And as soon as they had given that information, he offered me her to be, the hematologist looks at me and he goes, and we really think it's important that Mackenzie become part of the study, because they'll be helping so many children. I said, what study? Well, it's a new study. And it's a new study to help understand children like Mackenzie. Mackenzie wasn't like, some space alien that dropped out of anywhere. She was a human being. She just happened to be biracial.
Right. No big deal. I mean, that happens all the time. I mean, half of everyone is biracial. I mean, it's crazy.
You know what I mean? And I was just sitting there, and he just looked at me, and he goes, so do you want me to go tell her? I'm like, no, I will go tell her. And he goes, well, we want to come in and offer her the ability to be part of the study. And I looked at him, and he goes, so at that time, she was being treated, and she always was, as a mature minor. So it didn't matter. If Mackenzie said yes to this study, it wouldn't have mattered what I said. They would have still done it.
That's just so crazy. So you could see from the very beginning that they had, a mission for her, or ideas about how they could exploit her for the study or for economic gain or something, right?
Yeah. And then I was trying to find documents to see if they had, because within that study, they were looking for specific children of biracial background, not just like Black, but like Japanese or, Asian or whichever, all different. Mm-hmm. Indian, they were looking to include within the study. And so when I got the word from the social worker, Mackenzie, they gave her vitamin K. She reacted to it because her blood clotting factor was so low, because it had polysorbate 80. But they didn't review the notes. And then I get a call from the social worker after, and she goes, Ms. Thornhill, we're just calling to let you know that we know that Mackenzie can't do the procedure today, and it wasn't your fault, so we're not coming in. However, we also want to let you know that the hospital has let us know that you're a very good mother, and that none of this is happening because you're not a good mother. And I'm like, so everything's happening because I'm questioning the hospital. And she just got quiet.
It's like, how condescending, Oh, yeah. And I was like, as if I need your permission to know if I'm a good mother or not. Yeah. Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah. Right. Like, this has nothing to do with you. And I'm this particular social worker, the 2 of them, I'm reporting them to their college as well. And we'll see what happens with that. So then the next week, Mackenzie was like, Mommy, if they come and take me from you. So like on the Saturday, she had another lumbar puncture. She let them know she was in pain. It was radiating down her leg, and she didn't want to do them anymore. They ignored her. By the Monday, she's like, listen, she said, I will do whatever I need to do so they don't take me. And I said, we can't do that either, Mackenzie, because then you're not going to have a voice. And I said, you already don't have one, and I can't be responsible for that being continuing. So we're going to do our best to walk through this, and hopefully we won't hit a minefield. But I said, that can't happen for you either. She goes, well, I won't be able to make it through this. there's no way. She goes, I just can't do it. I said, we'll do it together. I said, don't worry about it. So then they held us there until that Friday, and then they let us go. But with the fact that they were going to force her to do the Arwinia again, because they were putting her through induction a second time when we went back in. They started it all over again, which is not even part of the standard of care. So at that point, when I realized that and I reached out to a friend, I knew that they were making us pay for disobeying the system.
God.
So when they hauled us back in, they made sure to keep us on the inpatients, because in outpatients, they can't call CIS on us. And inpatients, so we were outpatients coming into the inpatients to have the procedure done. So they could hold CIS over my head.
That is so...
The Friday before, which I didn't mention to you, I contacted administration and patient rights service within the hospital, and I filed a complaint. I contacted the head nurse. I asked them who reported me, who misreported me. I wanted their names. And at that time, they said that they couldn't give me any of that information. Where I had notified the patient's advocate, which they work for the hospital anyway, so they don't advocate for you really. Mm-hmm. She knew then that it was put on her radar. So then when it was put on her radar, she put it on, because I told her I was reporting Dr. Whitlock, that it was then put on the administrator of the hospital's radar. So by the time we came in on that Monday, Mackenzie's like, Mommy, I'm really nervous, because they forced her then to start taking antihistamines, 3 different kinds, to subdue her reactions. Mackenzie reacted to every single one of them, even though supposedly PEG was removed. Where even before she started treatment that day, she was faint. And they were like, oh, well, you're not showing a reaction like normal. And that's where I looked at Dr. Hart and I said, that is the most malicious, devious thing you did. You took a 12-year-old. You forced her to take antihistamines that turn off all the receptors in her body, so she can't feel a typical reaction. And so she's not showing it the way she does before. Now you're telling her that she's not reacting. I said, don't play mind games with my daughter.
Man.
So when they started treatment, they dragged that treatment out 7 hours. It was supposed to be 2.
Why did they do that? Why 7?
They would stop it because she was reacting and start it again. And stop it and let her calm down and start again. Okay. All the while holding CAS over my head.
Okay. God. So were you were there at the time, obviously.
Oh yeah. She never did anything by it. I was there. I was working beside her bed if I was in the hospital with her. I had my computer with me. So then they ended up telling us that she needed a blood transfusion after that, or platelets, sorry. So the platelets weren't going to be given until 11 o'clock at night, and we had to be back the next day for another treatment. And Mackenzie was like, I said, do you want to go home or stay? She goes, we're not safe if we stay, which I knew that, but I also wanted her to use her voice. So we left, we drove home, got home 1 o'clock in the morning, and then had to be in for a next treatment the next day. The next day, when we came in for treatment, Mackenzie's like, I don't feel right about this. I said, me either. And there's a child life specialist, Sophie. She was really nice. That was the one person that actually was helpful, because she would be assessing Mackenzie, and she put it in Mackenzie's file that she assessed as a maturity of a 16-year-old. And that was probably one of the things that helped us to a degree, as much as we got help, but to a degree, because that day she reacted to treatment again. And the doctor came in and Mackenzie said, I don't want to do this anymore. And she goes, yeah, well, you don't really have a choice, do you? And I looked at her and I was like, I'm not happy with this. Like, this can't continue. And she's like, are you red light, yellow light, or green light happy or upset? And I'm like, I'm not 5. I'm so far red light that, and she goes, yes, but you don't have a choice, do you? So Sophie had a really good talk with Mackenzie, and she's like, Mackenzie, don't do what you don't want to do no matter what. If this is your body, and that helped give Mackenzie some more confidence, because even though she was always afraid that I was going to be taken, and at the same time, I didn't want her doing what she was doing, so if I was taken, that would have been the price of it, and like, what were they going to do, hold her down and force her? I don't even know if they would have gone that far. I did ask Dr. Pundit if she would do that, and her eyes bugged out of her head. But when the doctor came back this time, She's like, I'm not doing it. So then the nurse came in and she said, we can't force you to do what you're reacting to. So once again, Mackenzie only literally did less than a quarter of the treatment, and voila, March 4th, she's in remission again.
Have you guys heard about systemic enzyme therapy or proteolytic enzymes? This is my secret weapon for battling inflammation. And we had a guest a long time ago, Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez, who is using high-dose proteolytic enzymes on late-stage pancreatic cancer patients with great success. Serrapeptase is derived from the same bacteria that the Japanese silkworm uses to dissolve its own cocoon. And these are from MitoLife enteric-coated serrapeptase and nattokinase. The main method of action is to dissolve necrotic debris in the blood that shouldn't be there. Sort of like Pac-Man, going all throughout your blood and eating things up like scar tissue, fibrin, fibrosis, calcification, fibrinogen. And this takes a massive burden off your liver and your white blood cells. It can be used with anything that's inflammatory to lower inflammation, anything that ends in an itis or osis. You can even use it topically with DMSO. I've done that before with great success. This stuff is amazing. It's called Dissolvidol, and you can find it on biochargeme.com under the MitoLife section. And our code EHR15 will get you a 15% discount.
So then they gave her platelets. They did not run the saline, which always helps flush out and helps with mast cell issues. She ended up having a reaction and her tongue swelled in her mouth. And this is where everything goes downhill because of what they did. So she had a lesion on the inside of her tongue, which one of them were concerned that it was AIDS.
AIDS. Oh, God. Okay.
You know, in the pure blood that they're giving everybody, right?
Yeah, right. Of course.
So I call them because a naturopath wouldn't cut it. If I'd gone to a naturopath and anything happened, I would have been considered negligent and I could have lost my other child, right? So I said, I told them, I took a picture and they told me not to come in. And I was like, no, she needs to be seen. I'm coming in. But my thought was we would go in, whatever they needed to do, we would get to go home. When they went in, they put her on 3 different kinds of antibiotics. And you have to keep in mind, the PICC line is running over her heart. So she literally, if they did a blood draw, she could feel it pull from her heart. And with these antibiotics, she was feeling it. Mackenzie was so sensitive. Like I had never touched or had to an antibiotic since she was, 3. I'd always use natural means, never had to do anything like that because she was so highly reactive to it. So with this, we go in. The fever and her tongue and her swelling was down within 24 hours. I said, okay, hi guys, so we're going to stop the antibiotics now. They're like, no. I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, well, her neutrophils are low. I said, well, she just had treatment on Friday. Of course, they're going to be low. And one of the antibiotics you have her on can affect neutrophils, gentamicin. So yeah, it's going to be low. So, okay, so we're just going to take her off because she was walking around perfect. She had been talking to her sister. She was great. Everything was fine. They're like, no, we're going to send you home until March 22nd with antibiotics. I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, that's standard of care. I said, you're going to kill her. And Mackenzie said that right out too. She goes, I can't do that. So my plan had been to, when we got home, figure out a way where I didn't have to continue giving it to her. They were going to send us home with a pump and everything, and it was going to be around the clock changing just like within the hospital because I refused to stay in the hospital.
Right.
By the Tuesday, the doctors and everything saw her. She did her hair. She was like, we were eating, we were downstairs, walking around. She couldn't wait to go. Dr. Gupta's like, yeah, you should be able to leave Wednesday. They're like, yeah, so we're going to keep you because our neutrophils are still low and we can't work this all out. I said, well, we want to go home. And they're like, yeah, well, we have to work this all out. By Wednesday, though, Mackenzie said, Mommy, there's something wrong with my knee. And her knee was swelling. Gentamicin can do that. Mm-hmm. But I hadn't at that time because it happened so quick. They also had her on Cipro, which is a floxing antibiotic.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So she told them the Tuesday night she wasn't 100%. They said, yeah, you have to stay on it, even though she had no fever. And her neutrophils, when we went in, her white blood cells were 2.10. By the time we finished these antibiotics, which were on the Friday, they were 19.38.
My goodness. Okay.
So by the Thursday, she was screaming in pain and she couldn't walk. And she had lost 8 pounds. And I was begging them. And I said, you guys, we have to turn this off. It has to stop. And they're like, no, we need to keep her on it. I said, you're going to kill her. I said, like, she doesn't need it. She now is bedridden. I'm carrying her to the bathroom. I have to get a commode for her to sit on. She can't hyperextend her legs. Like, she can't move. You have to stop. And by this time, her blood pressure was acting really weird. It would go really high, and they couldn't figure out why. But if you're having an allergic reaction to something, it's really interesting because with different aspects of treatment, they know different ways the body will show an immune response, which the majority of us would have to wait until there's anaphylaxis. But the blood pressure was one of them because we don't have the machines anyways, right? Mm-hmm. And so by the Friday, I got them to stop. But that time, she was in a really bad state where I had a friend searching out how to detoxify her from this antibiotic and to address the floxing, because they sent in a physiotherapist to make sure Mackenzie could continue to move, because they said that it was because she was not moving.
Okay.
And they forced treatment on her. After the treatment was forced on her, on the Friday, her blood pressure remained at 148 to 168, and we couldn't get it down. And she looked at me and she said, first, the Friday, she said, Mommy, I can't do this anymore. I need to go back and lie on the ground and go back to God. I can't do this anymore. And that's not her. And I was like, I'm going to get us out of here, Mackenzie. So I was getting the doctors to come in because they were holding us there, and I was trying to get her home so if I could detoxify her to a degree, because with the treatment, you have to be careful. Because they're not kidding when they say herbs actually make things worse if you're in the middle of treatment. It has to be spaced out a certain time, especially if someone has such sensitivities as Mackenzie did. And no one would come in. So I was like, can you come in and see her? Oh, we'll offer her morphine. Well, morphine's not going to cut it. She can't walk. And her heart rate, what's wrong with that? Why can't we get that under control? Like, that's new. Right. And no help. So then by the Sunday, I'm like, I need out of here. I need to help her. Like, you're letting me out. And the doctor was like, I said, did you record her reaction to these antibiotics? We've been verbally told she had an allergic reaction. We have been told not to put it in her chart.
Oh my goodness.
I'm like, it's your legal responsibility as a hospital, a corporation, to report anaphylaxis or any type of allergic reaction to a product you're giving a child.
Of course. I
said, on top of that, I'm going to do it. So I really hope you do, because if not, there's going to be some major attention paid to this hospital. Mm-hmm. And so anyways, by the Monday, Dr. Gupta came in. My sister was there because you weren't allowed anybody extra to stay over, all that type of stuff. It was just me. And I said, I really need some support and someone else. So she videotaped the conversation. Dr. Gupta said that he didn't see any correlation between the antibiotics and her health declining, that he thought it was all cancer-based, and that they weren't going to do anything to help us, so they were going to let us go. He said, now I can let you go, but by rights, the standard of care, I should be keeping you in here and keeping her forced on antibiotics until March 22nd. And I looked at him, I said, so you're letting us go? And he goes, yeah, I'm not doing anything to help you. So got out of there, got her home. She couldn't walk. She was walking with a walker like a 100-year-old person. And her heart rate was through the roof, and they weren't doing anything to help, and I couldn't get anything to bring it down. By the Friday, we had to go in for her last lumbar puncture, and on the way into the hospital, she's like, I don't feel good about this. And I said, I don't either. And she goes, no, I really don't feel good about this. And she had asked me during the week, and I don't know, some of your listeners will know, some of the Bible stories we were taught and stuff, and she had asked me if we were Job in the Bible. Mm. And I looked at her and I said, what do you mean by that? And she goes, well, Mommy, she goes, if we're Job, and if this is a test and we're Job, who's going to die? And the sad thing is that had crossed my mind too, because I couldn't find anybody to help us. one thing I did forget to share before I finish off on this is that when Mackenzie went back into the hospital because of the reaction with her tongue, I had at this time found a doctor who off the record would work with her. And if she was on the record, she would have lost her license or they would have come after her. So we had agreed. She was a naturopath. She does specialize with cancer. And it was just a fluke that I had found her. And I reached out and I was starting that process. So this time with her being in remission, I was going to do the hard exit with the Form G, get that done faster. And then, because my lawyer had told me that she thought 100% that we would win. They didn't think that they would give Mackenzie back her capacity, but that they would give me, that I would win based on everything we had done and all the aspects of the treatment being worse than the disease, right? So on the way in, she just wasn't herself anymore. And we got in, she couldn't walk. So she was in a wheelchair. And we went up and she's like, I'm scared. And I said, me too. And I tried to distract her as well. And I was trying to figure out what to do. And I called my lawyer and I called her lawyer. I couldn't get a hold of them. Got into the room and the doctor was like, okay, so today is going to be a lumbar puncture and we're going to do a bone aspiration. And Mackenzie says, I don't feel safe. And I said, I don't either. And she goes, yes, well, you know what will happen if you don't. So we go down into the room and she's holding my hand and she said, please don't let go. And you can't stand there with them, right? Once they put them asleep. And I said, I'm here, I promise. I said, it's going to be okay. I said, don't worry, it's going to be okay. So I go outside and I'm sitting across. And I'm talking to a good friend, Elizabeth. And it's 20 minutes. And I'm like, okay, this should be done. I'm like, something's wrong. And I was telling her, right? And she's like, oh, think positive. I said, this is not about thinking positive. I said, this is real life. And I said, something's wrong. 45 minutes. No, nobody coming out.
Yeah.
And so then all of a sudden I see this doctor, Alexandra, run in. And I'm like, oh, and I was on the phone. I said, oh, something bad happened. And my girlfriend was just trying to calm me down, right? She's like, no. And I said, no. And anyways, she comes out and she goes, so Trina, I just want to let you know, Mackenzie spiked a fever. And I'm like, you didn't give her treatment then, right? And she's like, what? And I'm like, even with your standard of care, it is against the policy to put a child under with a fever. And she goes, oh, well, we want to test her for COVID. I said, if you touch her, that'll be the last child. I said, she did a spit test yesterday. There was nothing. And I said, I don't know what you're doing. And she goes, oh, and I said, what are you doing in there anyway? And she goes, oh, I always come down on Fridays to check the sample. I said, no, you don't. I said, I've never seen a doctor run in there yet. And I've been here for many punctures and watching other families go through it. And that's never happened. And she took off, literally left me, just left me there. Jeez. And when they opened the door, 2 of the nurses were crying. And one of the doctors just looked at me and he was shaking his head and with sadness. And they wheeled her down to a special room, because COVID is all that. Sorry. This C word is all that. And we get down to there and I said, what happened? And they're like, well, she spiked a fever and we had to call the team. I said, I'm the mother. I'm sitting right out across the hall. Why didn't you come consult with me? Well, the team said to go ahead. That's not their child. I said, get out. And from there, I called administration. I called my lawyer, her lawyer. I was told not to talk to Mackenzie because, and I do think that she flatlined on the table. I can't prove that yet. Okay. I think they lost her on the table, that her heart stopped. I still am waiting to get the paperwork on what happened because now where she's dead, I have to jump through additional hoops to get them. And the nurse was weird too, because she's like, let her sleep. And I was like, what happened? And so when Mackenzie came to, she wasn't the same. But she was like the same with me, but she was really weak. Like the weakest I've ever seen her, because she's a really strong, like considering everything she'd gone through, she was like
super strong, right?
Yeah, like I don't know how to explain it. Like even if her body was not doing what she wanted, she still persevered. So she looked at me and I was like, are you okay? And I was giving her a drink, and then Dr. Gupta and Laurel came into the room. And they're like, okay, so I'm always honest with you, right? I'm like, yeah. And I at this point, they were so afraid of me at this point. He was not allowed to come into the room alone without someone else, but I wasn't allowed to have someone present with me. So he looks at me and he goes, so just want to let you know, somehow the cancer spread. And just want to let you know, it's no longer acute lymphoblastic leukemia. It's acute myeloid leukemia. And I said, so she's misdiagnosed, right? Or you triggered it off on her with treatment. And he goes, so she has a 20% chance to live. Now, that's within a span of 18 days of her being in a remissive state, right? Cancer dormant.
Of course.
To dying. So when Mackenzie and I heard the 20%, we were like, okay, this is a way for us to get into palliative care. I'm like just leveling with you. Get into palliative care in a remissive state for her. See if we can stop the damage that's been done. By this time I had that naturopath and another doctor who specializes in cancer. So I'd figured out some things by this time. And so they said, you either can do the treatment, she'll die, or go home in palliative care. So Mackenzie's like, I just want to go home. So the whole way home, she's like, we're going to fix this. And that's where her mindset, and that's where my headset was. Now, do you send a child home in palliative care and offer them blood products and or blood work? As many as you want. Have you ever heard that before?
No.
That's what they did. They offered us to come in for blood product and or platelets whenever needed, and they could do standard blood work whenever needed for as long until she passed away. So Mackenzie, the heart was the issue, which I didn't know and they didn't tell me, and I couldn't get a hold of her files, and I still don't have them. But I have a monitor, a finger monitor, and I put it on because like she just seemed off, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Mm-hmm. And her blood pressure was staying at 148 to 168. So then I was contacting all of my friends who are in alternative minded to help to see about a way to bring it down. Then she spiked a fever, which was odd because it's never happened for her ever, even through the whole treatment. So then they offered her blood product. We went in, they gave her B blood product. So in the hospital, they don't believe. So even though you have to go in and they want to know what blood type you are, when you go in the hospital, if you are A positive, they're going to give you A negative, A positive, AB or B blood.
Okay.
So if a person has issues with mast cell, Mackenzie did better with A or AB. And as a direct result of that, she reacted to the blood product. And between the Thursday to the Sunday, she died.
My goodness.
She slipped into a coma on the Sunday and then didn't wake up. And then she died in my arms with my family around in the house.
So she was at home when she passed.
Yep, I was holding her.
Oh my God.
So another thing that parents need to know is that when they put a kid into palliative care, they still refuse to give Mackenzie her capacity back. The reason being is palliative care lasts for 5 years within Canada. So you can be in that state for 5 years. Within that time, if I had recovered her, which they were afraid I was going to do, they would pull her back into treatment.
What a wicked system.
Yes. And the sad thing is, I knew better. I had removed her from the system. We ended back up in it, and I couldn't get her out. And when you watch your child who's really, really, really bright, know that they're killing her and that there's nothing that can be done. Something has to change, and I doubt it's going to change with the way the system is now, but people need to, one, stay out of the hospitals, and two, create a system outside. That's what I'm working towards myself, is to have a solid system outside of Trustworthy that can come together, that are aware of how the system is so corrupt. Mackenzie wanted to share this with everybody herself, and since she's not here, I promised her that I would do it if anything happened to her.
So, a couple questions in regards to the work that you're doing about that, and then also what's going on and what are your intentions for dealing with this hospital now?
So I've consulted, I have consulted with lawyers, and they said until the college investigation is completed, that they don't feel that it will go anywhere. Plus, now I'm going to have to likely have her body exhumed and have tested on as well. The hospital wasn't going to, so Mackenzie and I reported together, and Mackenzie gave verbal consent. And that's another thing that the people need to realize. When I told the hospital that they were not giving us conformed consent in the hospital, as they're legally responsible to do, the hospital doctor, Dr. Gupta, informed me, please don't say that because I'm going to have to call CAS.
Why would you have to do that?
Because I was then not agreeing to go along with what was being said, because I was telling them that they weren't doing informed consent. So I'm not complying with what they want me to do. So
when dealing with hospitals, it's really quite crazy when you deal with these institutions like this that are ran by the government. We all know that, the courtroom, for example, is just a massive show. It's a massive psyop. It's just a theater to get people to believe in the court system. And so when you're in the hospital and dealing with doctors, if you come off really strong and really harsh, then you almost have a bullseye on your back. So you have to kind of do it subtly and act in ways that will get you what you want, but then not have a target on your back too, right? It's really kind of this weird dance, isn't it?
Yeah, but I also think I had reached out, which is a totally different topic. I don't even know if you touch on this topic, but I had reached out in August regarding looking at our birth certificate and all the different things that are tethered to that. And I was looking at a remedy for it. I chickened out because at that time I did not feel that I knew enough. And it was put on my heart to do it. And if I had done that, I do believe through the way to remedy the birth certificate component, I would have been able to circumvent and navigate within a different legal system, and it would never have happened this way.
Yeah, we've had a number of guests on the show talking about that. And one of them was a guy by the name of Cal Washington, but I've done a ton of research into that as well. And it's that birth certificate that ties us to all of these institutions that, creates, a legal entity under your name that's not really you, the straw man they call it. And, they treat, so once you're on their property, the corporation can do whatever they see fit that aligns with the mandate of that corporation. And that's exactly what they did. And the funny thing is, when you go in the hospital, sick kids now, they have their 11 expectations within the hospital, and none of them have to do with anything to do with the kids. No. It has to do with honoring the corporation. So for parents moving forward, I'm not to sound overly negative. If you end up in that system, there is no way out of that system unless, and even I was gentle. So I didn't get really frustrated until February. Up until that time, P's and Q's, here, what do you think of this information? How does this work? Why are you doing this? I used my doe-eyed presentation of myself to not ruffle and make them feel that I was challenging them, but at the same time, being very supportive and advocating for my daughter, because legally, even within the system that we currently have, when you're designated a secondary decision maker,
you still can fall, you still have rights, but the hospital trumped it. Now, from what I understand from the College of Physicians, the hospital was going to refuse the doctors to allow access to Mackenzie's data and her hospital notes. But when I sent them pictures of what they did to Mackenzie, the hospital was incredibly upset. The College of Physicians. They are now doing the investigation, for both of those doctors. So the only way for parents to protect their families is to not end up in there at all, ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. It's just a black hole. It's a black hole. Wow. So you're working on ways now to help educate parents and to work, find an alternative system. How do you think that's going to go?
One I'm looking at, so I'm putting together a foundation for Mackenzie. I'm in the process of that. And I am currently starting to work with some doctors and nurses that are outside of the system. And I'm still new to that myself, as being a practitioner to help and support. But I'm also looking for like-minded to be outside of it. Like, I don't know what it's like in California, or I kind of do, because Ontario mimics you guys a bit politically. So I'm sure it's not overly shits and giggles there either. Sorry. No, right. With what's going on. But, up here, the way that it's going, you can't get into a hospital unless you're vaccinated, jabbed. I don't even know. I can't. Okay. Sorry. I don't want to get.
No, it's okay.
Okay. So within the children's system, you can. So they'll still allow parents in because those hospitals are research hospitals. Mm-hmm. So looking for avenues outside where, as soon as someone who comes to me with my practice, who outside of my scope, there's something like a broken arm, or I don't know, any of those other things, I'm looking for practitioners that can handle that without them having to be sent into a system that actually is going to label that broken arm where a child was going down a hill at, 100 kilometers an hour and wiped out, as something else where CIS will be involved. I want to create something where they're not part of it, and that they can't just red flag anything, and that cancer is the last thing that they look at, meaning they look at every aspect and rule everything out before they jump to that, because cancer is not cancer anyways. Right? Like, there's various, cancer is a parasitic component, and a bacteria overgrowth, and an immune response. It's so layered that they won't even look at. So that's what I'm hoping to achieve. She's only been gone and buried since April 2nd. So I started going with the foundation, getting all things together, and I haven't really grieved. So I'm working through that too. At the same time, educating anybody that I can until that's up and going, to be able to set up a system for children and families to not to be in fear and still get the help that they need.
Yeah. Gosh, man, thank you for sharing all of that. And I think it's just so important for people to understand that, when we live in complete naivety with how the systems work, the system is designed to perpetuate the system. And people think that doctors and hospitals and the people on TV and politicians and all these people are there to help them. And that's not the case at all. It's just not. It's not how the world works. And fortunately, many of our listeners see through all that, but the average person still thinks that, the government would never lie to them, and the media people are their friends because they've watched their broadcasts every night, and people are out there to help them. And, people are just living under a cloud, I think, that they have no idea what's going on until something like this happens. And I think it's really important to educate yourself before, and make sure you know what your rights are, make sure you're healthy, you're strong, and all of these things, so that you never have to deal with these entities,
1,000%. And the saddest part for me is the vaccine component when they were kids. Mm-hmm. And if I could have undone that would have saved a lot of what also led to any of the underlying issues, right? They didn't need them. And that's something that I didn't know. And it's not even that I didn't know, because I had never even considered any of that pre-children to a degree either, or I didn't even realize that was part of the ritual, because literally that's what it is. And, but thankfully I did get out of that ritual. But sadly my children paid a price, just like all the generations before them, for a good chunk of the majority of people. Parents not realizing that. But if anybody was going to start investigating, that would be one area I'd be like, yep, dive into that before you have kids and realize what you are doing to children and that you are setting them up for things that, especially when hormones, and with girls in particular, but boys too, and that major change, that a lot of those dormant things that we've, sadly, some of the parents who have made those decisions without knowing any better and woke up after, that's a whole other thing that will be opened up. So even with whatever was going on with Mackenzie, at her being 12 and going into her 13th year, any of the hormonal changes that spiked any of this too, like it's something that I will forever regret and I can't take back. And now it's just a matter of supporting her sister, who they were best friends, her and her sister. So, and making the best that I can for her and to ensure moving forward that she has the freedom that she deserves.
Well, thanks again for sharing all of that, and hopefully this will get shared far and wide and people will start waking up. Where is the best place to find you?
Best place you can get me is Food Fueled is my website, and I'm on Instagram under F Fueled. And yeah, those are the two places you can reach out to me. If you want to email me, Trina@foodfueled.com. You can reach me there as well. And if there are any parents going through any of this, I'd love to hear from them as well. Or if they've gone through it and they know, so they know that they're not alone too, right? Like this is a path that no one wants to go down, but you don't have to be alone.
Yeah, and I imagine too, with the education of parents, with the building of systems, putting them in place to help navigate parents within that system and creating an alternative system, and then creating maybe a network of other parents that can help support other parents going through it. There's a lot of layers to, what your foundation can do. So I'm really excited you're doing it and helping awaken people.
Thank you. And thank you for reaching out. It was super kind. And giving me the opportunity to share her story. I really do wish she was telling you it though.
I agree. Thank you so much. All right, there you go, guys. Episode 738. That was one of the few shows where I'm just actually flabbergasted. Oh my goodness, listening, and I don't have any words. I hope that information helped you in some way realize that the medical establishment and the medical industry, and that's really what it is, it's an industry, the politicians, the media people controlling the media, the people that are on the media, all of these people do not have your best interest in mind. And I was just talking with Trina off the air that, it's not until you understand that, these institutions are set up to extract money from you and to steal your life force and to profit off of you. That's what it's designed to do. And they don't care. They're not there to help you. They're not there to care for you. They're not there to offer you free things without some sort of contract. And so when you understand, if you don't understand how, all of that, a story like this doesn't make any sense. And we're just talking about this off the air, is that it doesn't make any sense. Why would doctors do that? Don't they want to see people live, and don't they want to help people recover and heal? No, it's not about that. It's about following orders and not losing your license. And this is the kind of thing that I think that people are going to have to start really waking up. It's the cops who are following these draconian orders. It's the medical establishment, the people in the medical field afraid to lose their license because they're following protocol. They're following the standard of care, and they're listening to their bosses all the while because they're afraid of losing their license. And at some point, we're going to have to stand up and say, you know what? I'm not doing that. And, if the entire hospital had a staff of doctors that were unwilling to do things that were going to kill people, and they said, no, we're not doing that, the hospitals would have to start changing. And I think that's what it's going to have to take. People are going to have to start risking their livelihoods and their jobs and losing licenses and changing careers. I mean, this is huge, because if you're just going to toe the line and be, I'm just following orders, I'm just doing what I'm told, that's the problem. That's how they've got all of these people because the cops, they don't want to lose their, ability to be a cop. The doctors don't want to lose their licenses. But at some point, we're going to have to start standing up and saying, you know what? No, this is not right. I'm not doing this. And if I'm going to receive, disciplinary action from the hospital, it's a numbers thing. It's a numbers thing. We all have to do this. And I understand it's really difficult because a lot of people, their entire, income is tied to having a license or practicing a law or whatever it is. So I think really what it comes down to is that all of us have to figure out some way of making money away from our career, have a secondary income, and start a secondary way of earning some money and being able to have that as a nest egg or to build that up while we're doing our job, and then start standing up for things so that if you lose your license and you can't practice law anymore, you can't be a police officer anymore, you can't be a lawyer anymore, you can't be a doctor anymore, you have a secondary way of earning some money. And I think it's going to take thousands and millions of people standing up saying, I'm not going to do things that violate my Hippocratic oath to first do no harm. And I'm standing up for that. And if doctors not only stood up, but took the offensive and started suing the hospitals for this, the hospitals would be so overwhelmed, even though they're government funded, they would be so overwhelmed with dealing with all of these lawsuits and dealing with all of these court cases and trying to keep staff and all of this stuff that eventually it would crumble, or they would have to change their policies, or something would happen. So I think that it's going to come to a point where we all have to, at some point, hit a fork in the road, and we're going to be called, all of us, to make a decision as to what we're going to do, what we're going to enforce, and how we're going to go about doing it, and maintaining our moral character in this world. And so, we had a guy on our show, Cal Washington. You may want to look into that show, because the only way to overcome this is to understand the straw man, the birth certificate, and how that plays a role in their control over us. And when you understand that everything is a contract, and contracts are always malleable, and contracts are living, and silence is acquiescence, and learning language. There's a really great interview or lecture on YouTube. It's a 9-hour lecture called Quantum Language, I think. I forgot the guy who did it, but it's something about quantum language, I think. And you'll get a healthy dose of how they're using language against you. I mean, this is high level stuff, and understanding how this all works is really a lifetime of study. And so now we're being thrust into all of this because of what's going on with Big C, Little B around the world. And we're at this point now where we're 3 years old and we're playing a basketball game against Michael Jordan in his prime. And we have to figure out quick how to play, what the rules are, and what our potential is really quick. So this is what has been forced upon us. And so these people are experts, and the entirety of every aspect of our life is dominated by contract law as the underpinning of how everything works. And so I hope that if nothing else, that this empowers you to start looking into, because, contract law, because essentially what contract law is from a legal perspective is the same as natural solutions for health from a medical perspective, right? So realizing that you can heal yourself without using drugs, surgery, chemotherapy, medications, radiation, all of that stuff. You can heal yourself and prevent disease. That's what contract law is from the legal perspective, realizing that we are free and we can, get control over the birth certificate that's being used against us, that's being sold on the stock market. People don't know what's really going on. And, hopefully this sparks a little itch and maybe allows you to do some research into that aspect of all of this. So, wow. Amazing show. Thank you, Trina, for being on and sharing all of that. I really appreciate it. You guys are amazing. And make sure to check out our sponsors for today's show, which is MitoLife, the MitoLife supplements. And, that's a really great way to improve your metabolic function, improve mitochondrial respiration so that your body can make ATP. The MitoLife supplements, as well as the Lifeblood, are just, a part of our everyday life. And it's part of what we do to stay healthy. And so check those out. MitoLife.co and use the code EHR15 to get your discount. And then on Lifeblood, you can get the methylene blue there. He's got vitamin K there. He's got progesterone there. He's got some great supplements and really great stuff in liquid form too, which is great for kids and things like that. And the coupon code is EHR10 for that. So I appreciate you guys so much. If you want to support the work that we do, there's a lot of different ways to do it. You can leave us a review on iTunes. You can share us on Instagram. You can join our Patreon. You can join our Extreme Health Academy. You can share us on Facebook. We have a link on our Extreme Health Radio homepage at the bottom for Amazon. If you want to click on that for any time you make a purchase there, that will give us a little, commission. It's small, but it helps. That's really powerful as well. And then we have our store, biochargeme.com, and that's available, and we're updating that. We're going to be updating that again very soon. Lots of amazing products that we use and utilize are on there. The Rebounder, the sauna, the MitoLife supplements, the Rife machines, blenders, all kinds of cool stuff on biochargeme.com. And so I'll put a link to Trina's website at extremehealthradio.com/738. Stay strong, my friends. Work on your health. Realize you're worth it. Don't skip out, and don't, be strong in your disciplines. Invest yourself in caring for yourself. Invest in yourself, and realize that we need healthy, strong people in this world to change this world. And we're not going to change the world if we're sick, if we have no energy, if we're lethargic, and have no motivation. We have to be strong and vibrant. And that's what really ultimately Extreme Health Radio is all about, right? Getting us to the level where we can have optimal health, vital energy, so that we can all go do whatever it is we want to do in this life. Whatever it is you're called to do, we all need energy to make that happen. And so that's why we do what we do. Not to just be into health for health purposes, but to be into health so that we can do our work in this world. And so that's what ultimately it's all about. So again, thank you guys so much. This is extremehealthradio.com/738. Love you all so much. Thank you for your support. Thank you for all that you do. I love you guys, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.
No material on this blog is intended to suggest that you should not seek professional medical care. Always work with qualified medical professionals, even if you educate yourself in the field of live food, nutrition, and alternative medicine. I'm not a doctor, nor am I offering readers medical advice.